Hello and welcome to episode number 20 of the Matt Belair podcast. Today's guest is the co-founder of Interaxon and the co-creator of the Muse meditation headband. He has a background in engineering and augmented reality. He is a movement specialist, traveler, and expert on technology and human development. Welcome to the show, my friend, Chris Aimone. Chris, what's up, brother?
What's up?
How you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
Where are you right now? You're at work?
Yeah, man. This is actually our Zendo. This is where we actually come out and we actually practice meditation here, and we develop new techniques and share wisdom, and we hang out together. So today I got the room all to myself, and so we can chat. But yeah, usually it's like a pretty bustling place where we bring our minds and hearts together.
Yeah, it's a beautiful spot. I think we met about a year ago, just over a year ago, and I got to see you in your headquarters in Toronto, and it's a pretty neat place. It's got a nice feel to it. You've got your upstairs traditional where you got to get work done, but then you've got this nice, beautiful little retreat that you can just come to. Probably, ideally, not too much at work, but.
Yeah, well, I
guess it's part of your game.
I think it's important for everybody to have those moments of pause in our day, and especially when you're trying to be creative and go into places uncharted, and we do have to connect to ourselves. I mean, it's from that place inside of us that where it comes out in the quiet that it's the source of our creativity and passion. So I think to have any place in a business or at home where you can actually have that kind of energy is so amazing.
Yeah, and I love how you encourage that with the staff and everything over there with Muse, and having people to actually engage in the practice of mindfulness and take time so they're centered at work, so you're having a synergy. Well, before we get into Muse, I just want to talk a little bit, maybe you can fill people in on your background, because it's super unique. I remember us when in our first meeting, one thing stuck because your background's in augmented reality. You know a lot about technology and things that I have no understanding of, but I see that you're a wizard in it. And I was bringing up a point, but you said something along the lines of, I was looking at using technology to kind of, create, superhumans and make us, just superhuman kind of deal. And you're like, no. Then I had a switch. How can we use technology to make us more human? And I was like, what an interesting thought. Like I just kind of fully flipped the script for me. And then, Muse and that whole game popped out of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's something that a lot of us probably feel now that, technology is becoming just ever more so embedded in our lives. And, we all have this crazy computer communicator connector in our pockets, which give us amazing power, but also has amazing power to pull us away. And so I think a lot of us feel a great tension there. And so, how do we manage that? But my own path is, it really started before that was a reality. And in some ways, I was imagining a reality like that. I was interested in what happens where, we get in bed with technology, with computers, and they become a part of us. And where does it lead us? Can it be really, in some way, live bigger and better because we have that? And so that really drove me very much so when I was into augmented reality, looking at what happens where we have a computer that we can look through, where the computer world becomes fused with the real world. I mean, you could call that Pokemon Go, or you could, call it Google Glass. You could, there's lots of examples now that we have. But so I was really interested in fusing the computational ability, the ability of other sensors to extend our own human limits. And there's some fun stuff there. I mean, you can walk around and you can see in the infrared, and you can hear beyond human hearing. I think as with computers, we have this vast ability to take in and process large quantities of information. In some ways, as human beings, we feel under-equipped in that way. So I was just totally fascinated by what we could do there. And indeed, to our early conversation, I mean, there was a flip that happened for me. And I mean, we could talk more in detail about, how that flip happened, but basically it was a recognition of the cost. But also, for myself, and this, I think for each of us on our paths, it's our own personal experience which really, gives us that, that trajectory. But for me, it was like, a few experiences that really, showed me what was latent inside of me that I probably, with some training and some effort and some love, could really, blossom into really the sort of things that I was looking for. And, I think, to sort of add to that, I still think technology, from this sort of like, extra human ability, there's great potential there. But I mean, I think with that, we need to really be able to honor how we are wired and function as human beings. And I mean, we have to be careful there. We are very susceptible, and technology gives us can powerfully leverage our susceptibilities, either for good or actually to take us into places where we don't want to be, where, we're really sort of subservient to, all of those triggers and, emotional urges that can end up driving us.
Right. Yeah. And you said something earlier before we popped on here that you were kind of learning about how human perception works and how we're understanding our realities, and then this really, made you want to move into a different direction as well.
Yeah. So I mean, if you experience augmented reality, if you experience trying to fuse other sensors into your sensorium, you really start to bump up against, our human perception and how our perception is constructed. And so with augmented reality, we're really playing with that, especially as you start to attach real objects into the world. Virtual objects into the world. And so an example of that is, for example, if you look at the device Google made, it covers only one of your eyes. Yet if you present information in the right way through one of your eyes, it appears like you're seeing it through both of your eyes. And it can actually seem like you have information which is part of the visual reality that, you'd perceive to be real. And I think that, if folks have a chance to try the HoloLens, I mean, that is a level up there where, you can start to really imagine, what this could be like when you start to really bring the virtual and the real together. And so I think, you really, you start to play with there, like, how do we construct how we as human beings construct the reality that we perceive? And, and what does it mean to actually perceive something to be real as opposed to artificial? And so I think, virtual reality definitely gets in there. I mean, you can put, something on your head, and you can, have some tools, and it's amazing. Even with today's technology, it's amazing what's happened in the VR world. But you can actually, be transported into an environment where this becomes very real for you. But I mean, there does become a time when this becomes indistinguishable. And is there a part of us already now where it's indistinguishable? So how do we construct that like reality that we perceive? And so, we all feel like we can, understand this reality that we're a part of, the way it feels, the way it sounds, the way it tastes, the way it, looks. And like, it is real for us. There's not any kind of like, uncertainty, for most of us there about what is out there. But I think when you start to really use some of these cues that human beings have to establish that reality as a way of presenting new things, you start to recognize how pliable it actually is, and how you can actually use some of that mechanism to create reality which is indistinguishable and becomes very real. So with realness, you get power, right? So you can create experience which really hits to the deepest parts of us because it's real for us. So yeah, when you're getting into augmented reality, you really are starting to play with that. Maybe it started with just audio recordings and gramophones where we could replay the experience of an orchestra, but I mean, we're creating realities. Yeah, so for me, that adventure where it took me was really looking deeply inside my own experience and saying, what's reality? How can I play with reality? Like, how do I construct it? How do I affect it? And by doing so, I really sort of, in some ways, for those who practice meditation, I was really engaging in contemplative questions and a contemplative practice of trying to understand what is this reality I perceive, what is perception, yeah. Anyway.
Oh man, I love that answer. It's interesting because when you go to that level and you are fusing, you know, what we perceive as real, actual reality, and then you hit that boundary where that line starts to, get crossed, and you start to question, well, like Inception, something like that. And as you're saying it, I kind of think about lucid dreams or just dreaming. And, the practice of me figuring out lucid dreaming. And that's when you're dreaming, it's real. It's 100% real. And so I'll do these reality checks. And the one that works best for me is plugging my nose. You can do pinches of your arm, but sometimes that tricks me. The one that doesn't trick me usually is plugging my nose. So if you're in a dream and you're breathing in your nose, right, and you plug it, and you breathe in, right, you'll actually continue to breathe, right? So I'll do that a few times during the day, or and always if something kind of weird happens, like if I feel a deja vu, or I see something that's a bit odd, you know what I mean? Like just something it could be just life oddness. And I'll be in the dream and I'm like, son of a gun, like dreaming, you know what I mean? And every time it's so real, and so it's an interesting thing to have the technology to be able to create a space like that and to lead you to those really deep and interesting questions, which a lot of people never really get to. What is reality? How am I creating my own reality? What the heck does any of it mean? And, if I'm going to be doing these things, what's the purpose? What's the core of this? How can I make it useful? And so as you're going through all that, this is about the time you started Interaxon, just after that?
I mean, this is still prior to Interaxon. It's, I guess, one thing that happened to me is I started to recognize how really living through technology, when I say that, I have to, acknowledge that I was wearing things on my head and walking around the city and actually really trying to investigate what it would mean to live, in synergy with a computer. I found that in a lot of the things that I was seeking were, further and further away from me. And so, for instance, being able to connect deeply with people, like, it took me a while for me to see and actually recognize this and understand it. But actually it was reducing my capacity to connect through all the senses. And, I had a mediator, which, changed perception. I was changing because, a lot of what I was doing would actually be now inextricable from, the things that these technological devices I'd be using. I mean, we all actually see this now. I mean, you can consider our social networks and how that's become like an appendage for us in a way, and it's part of how we relate to things. But I found that the very things that I was seeking were becoming more and more distant. And I was like, screw this stuff, put the computer down. I'm doing something different. Is kind of a little bit of what happened. And I really became interested in just the sensory experience as a human being. And, on one hand, I was very interested in sensing more. But it was always through the addition of technology. And then I went to, can I sense more just through what I already have? Is there a way that I can just develop that, core innate ability to go beyond where I thought its limits truly were? And so I got really interested in just, engaging in, in the reality, the fabric of the world. And for a while started making these wild musical instruments that, ran on water. And so they were called hydraulophones. I started another company with this professor. And for a while we built musical instruments, and we actually encouraged people to play in water, play music, and engage with each other in a way that was new. So yeah, I totally went undigital for a while.
Can you order one of those if you wanted? I didn't know that. That sounds wild.
Well, you can go and play one at the Ontario Science Centre. Actually, it's their architectural centerpiece in front of the building, and it's a huge water organ.
Really?
Yeah. So you can check it out on Wikipedia. So, I built that when I should have been doing a master's thesis. Computer vision, water. I don't know. Like it's. So yeah, I did that for a while, and Interaxon, was birthed around that era when I was just, basically having fun making music with water. And it came in through really just the desire to create experiences. And Trevor and Ariel, my two co-founders, basically we just had dreams of using a technology that we had all used together in the past as an artistic expression. And it actually came from explorations in wearable computing, but we sort of repurposed it to create art. And we were interested in how we could bring this into environments where people were connecting with each other, like, be it festivals, parties, and give people a new medium through which they could experience each other to kind of, shift the perspective and offer new opportunity. So Interaxon got started out of that. It was a desire to create experiences between people. And so we got started. We built, a bunch of, fun brain tech demos, and we sort of shopped it around until, we had basically we have funding that endeavor.
That's amazing. Well, yeah, you definitely need to share your Olympic experiment that put you on the map, because I don't know if you can share how exactly you did that, but you told me. I was like, no, that doesn't make any sense.
To this day, it's like one of the more wild things that I've done. But yeah, it was a really fun opportunity that really catapulted us, and it came out of this, us looking for the right, venue and an opportunity to showcase the technology, and we had this great opportunity with the Ontario government in Canada, and it was at the time just before the Vancouver Olympic Games in 2010, and to make a long story short, they happened to be looking for an exhibit that would showcase Ontario. And we were able to build this really elaborate experience where we had people who were in Vancouver, which is, on the west coast of Canada, controlling the lights in the CN Tower, Niagara Falls, and Canada's Parliament buildings in Ontario, like thousands of miles away. And they did this by affecting their internal state of mind. And so they would sit down in front of this, great big huge screen where we had a live telecast from each of these cities. And you actually sat in a chair and, you caused the lights in the CN Tower, which I can actually see from where I'm sitting right now. It caused them to like spin around like crazy, and it looked like the tower was going to blast off, essentially. But yeah, you were able to engage in this experience where you tuned in and affected something which was much larger than life. So, and we had thousands of people try it. It was really so much fun.
That's amazing, man. That's yeah, that's so wild. I know you're telling me, I'm like, how the heck does that work? Like that's wild. So you have the ability to take that technology to that kind of level. You think a thought, and it's manifesting across Canada and changing things. And then you kind of take that idea and then you put all of your genius and effort into Muse meditation headband, which I have tested and I support and give you the thumbs up, because when I'm teaching athletes and I'm coaching people, meditation is such a foundational piece. It's a prerequisite to so many things. I say to people frequently, like, if you can't quiet your mind for more than 10 seconds, it's a level of consciousness. Like, you're in a different level of awareness. It's not good or bad. It just is. If you don't have that ability to create a silent space for yourself to really connect to who and what you are, even a little bit, you can't shut off the monkey mind, or at least have a practice where you observe the monkey mind. You're operating in a fundamental level of awareness. And so what the headband does, in my experience, and it's your thing, so I'll let you talk about it. But for me, in my experience, you put it on and you go through all the training, and it makes it so easy, because, all the time people are like, how do you meditate? What do you do? I can't stop thinking. He's like, yeah, that's kind of why you do it, because that's the whole point. That's why you practice. So it takes out all of the mystery, makes it really, really easy. And within a week, exactly the results you're getting. You're getting consistent feedback. So that's really amazing, because a lot of people, you go and you sit down and meditate, and then you're just like, is anything happening? They don't know what's happening. So it's like, yeah, that's the whole point. Like, I know it doesn't make any sense. Sit down and just observe your thoughts. And it'll make sense after you do it for a bit. So, I think it's a really amazing piece of equipment. I think that it's an amazing direction and intention. And I'll just kind of let you take it from here and explain, a little bit what you've done with Muse, and why you feel meditation is an important part in your life, and how it might be able to serve an individual and community.
I could talk for hours right there. Maybe I'll try not to answer everything.
I don't know. I don't know what like proper interviewing is, but I'm pretty sure I don't do it. It's like maybe one guy's like, here's 10 things, just pick apart.
Oh man,
whatever you feel. Just
I just want to address one thing you said before these questions came in, and that is like, whether or not we can detect thoughts. And I think there's a lot of different ideas there, and probably a lot of misunderstanding around the state of brain technology right now. And in many ways, we're really not at the stage where we can detect people's thoughts. And that's also, what are you thinking? That's part of it. But also this notion of like, well, are you having a thought or not? And I mean, that's pushing the frontiers of what we're actually studying in the neuroscience right now. And so the level at which you get, information about a person's experience is, we can talk about that a lot, and it's really interesting and it's really valuable, but, we're not at the level now where we can actually detect people's thoughts. And that's important for people to know. But moving on from that, I think, there's teaching meditation. I think you articulated it very well. It's just, it can be very challenging, especially for someone who's never tried before. And, from the outside, you just see somebody sitting there. And it's just like, okay, I'm going to sit there and do nothing. Okay. And this is supposed to help me. And like, this is going to make me better at whatever. This is going to make me, more relaxed, or it's going to make me better at like going down a hill on a snowboard. Like what are you talking about here? And so I think, and I loved the way you introduced the experience. And, but I think, for me, I like to, bring the notion of feedback, which is essential in any learning process, right? This is how we learn anything. And, it's very hard to get feedback on an internal process. And, whether this be you're trying to learn on your own, or you're learning in the presence of a teacher, so the best situation is you have a really good teacher that you can work with one-on-one. And, they've had the experience of teaching many people and understanding deeply, how as human beings we work, and they can see within you what's happening, because they can read all the signs. And in that, you can really help to guide someone into an experience and have them see for themselves what this is all about. But, for someone who doesn't necessarily have that level of contact and that level of feedback, how do we learn to identify this awareness of awareness? And how do we learn that we have some agency in this process? And there are skills that we can grow and cultivate, and how those skills are going to change us. So I think, a tool like Muse, which offers a reflection of what's happening inside, it provides something external to us, which gives us a reflection of what's happening inside of us, really gives us, something that we can use to gain feedback around this experience. And it's interesting, like in the development of Muse, we tried lots of different things. And from a certain perspective, any kind of feedback from inside is helpful. And so, I don't want to say that, what we try to do is measure like meditation. I mean, there are many kinds of meditation, and all of them serve a really important role. And I think, I like the sort of the two pieces you pulled out there. I mean, one of them is, developing that ability to find that quiet and to focus. And another part of it is to have this awareness of what's happening, whatever's happening. So these are two like separate, but like fundamentally important things. And so, from the perspective of growing an awareness of what's happening and being able to observe it, we found that, it almost didn't matter what the feedback was, so long as it was feedback on processes that were real, because each one of those things helped to develop an awareness. Now, it's definitely important that, the understanding is not that that one awareness is the be all and end all. I mean, part of what we're doing here is we're trying to expand our awareness, right? So we actually are building a larger language, right? A larger dictionary of experience that we've been exposed to and can recognize and can feel. And so I actually am a huge believer in actually doing things that simply expand awareness, because that allows us to comprehend what's happening more deeply. It allows us to think about what will happen with a greater comprehensiveness, lots of things. And then there's the cultivation of attention, and there are many different scenarios that can help us cultivate that skill. And so we know attention is critical to everything really in our lives, and specifically in meditation, it is like core fundamental. This is the telescope for your experience, or the microscope that you turn within to study what's there. So developing attention is super important. So in Muse, it's a focused attention practice primarily that you engage in, and you're trying to build the skill of attention. Part of it is understanding that you have attention and that there's some agency, and that you can actually, have that sort of willful input into what's happening. And the other part of it is actually just the practice, which builds the muscle. It's building capacity, and that just comes from doing the work. And so, and there are lots of things there which can help people do the work. And so, we certainly don't think about Muse as being the only or right way to practice meditation, but it's a tool to help people, find, that skill, and to start to work with it and tune it into practice with it and motivate them. But I mean, beyond that, there are so many things that a person can go on to deepen that practice, and and to make it really appropriate for how they're going to live their life, and every day. So you're not going to walk around with a Muse on all the time, and and what we really want is to have awareness in every moment, and bring that attention and focus into every moment. I actually have one right beside me. I'm sitting at my desk here, so this is the Muse for anybody who hasn't seen it. And I should have had a white one, but basically you put it on like this. And this reads your brainwaves and gives you feedback.
There's the model shots on the website where the employees and yourself are looking pretty handsome and also Star Trek-like.
Yeah, maybe someday.
You brought up so many good. Sorry, there's a lag. I don't want to cut you off.
Yeah, go ahead. Currently your face is a bit frozen, so.
I think it's a little bit slow internet on both ends, but people can weave through the choppiness and the words to figure out the message in here. But you said a lot of really great stuff there, just about cultivating awareness, and I kind of had a little bit of a download, because if you think about fitness, for example, let's say we're a bunch of years ago and we want to be fit, right? Somebody, everybody's out of shape, but then somebody invents a kettlebell or somebody invents a barbell, and you're like, dude, you could actually use this barbell and it'll help you become stronger. Now, you could just not be a lazy caveman or a person and eat TV dinners all the time or whatever, but this now gives you a catalyst and a reason. And the other big thing is direct feedback is so valuable. It's so valuable. So I was kind of thinking like, if this is the beginning of a piece of equipment that can give us direct feedback, and then you also have with the app, it comes with, little challenges in a game. And that's just like that, we like instant gratification. We like these things. So we're kind of playing on our human nature to develop a useful practice. If we could use a similar thing to get kids to eat more freaking vegetables, you know what I mean? If we could use a similar thing to just be aware that we're drinking too much alcohol, like it's just feedback, and then you just know you can make a different choice. Like, oh, I drank 60 drinks last week. I didn't think it was that much, but when you do 8, whatever the case is, you have the feedback, and then you can be like, oh, okay, cool. And that really does expand your awareness, and it expands your human experience. And that's what the goal is, to be more present. And when I talked to Rob Jameson a couple episodes ago, it's an interesting one for you guys on here. He was talking about such interesting stuff. And I come up with the ideas like, wouldn't it be interesting? Because I believe, and I'm sure you think the same thing, that extremely powerful. So if we're going around every single day thinking about, how we're not good enough, or how we have lack, or how it is, and we just keep projecting these things, we're creating. So if there was a device that kind of could log and track all of our thoughts, and you say, 50, this percentage is positive, this is negative, this was on illness, and this was on health, this was on creation, and this was on imagination, this was on girls, and this one was on television. And what that would do would just allow us to just be really conscious, more information. And it's using this information and feedback and data so that we can make better choices, and we can become better humans, not just to fully check out, right? And that's kind of, in the sense of creating this reality, we're checking out. When a kid is playing a video game, he's kind of checking out, like he can do it, but we could also use that process, understand our human nature, and have them actually learn ways to check in more, which I find pretty interesting. I don't know, comment on that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I love the examples you were making around patterns and seeing patterns. And so it's interesting that sometimes, for instance, just making a log of things and then being able to look at that, a week or 2 weeks or a month after you started this ritual, you're able to see things in a light that was invisible to you before, because the time scale was wrong for us as human beings, right? Like, maybe we're pretty good at, understanding what's happened in the last 5 minutes, and that changes as we're looking, back the last hour, right? Or the last day or the last week. And some of the things that we'd like to see are actually things that we only can see clearly if we can aggregate things, because we don't operate on that time scale. We just can't remember. And so identifying a pattern really is, and being able to watch the pattern is really what allows us to be able to make change. And so, in order to make a change to the system, you need to be able to witness what the system is doing. And in many of the cases, I think where technology can actually serve us is to start to bring to light the things which we couldn't see just because of how we function and the kind of awareness we've developed. And so there's probably a lot of things that we'd like to change if we could actually see what we were doing and how that was affecting us. And so it's interesting also to me, once you have received the feedback and you're able to witness through a tool some of what's happening habitually, if you can actually start to grow an awareness of these things and they actually become part of something that you actually can see. So this is an expanded awareness of what's happening for you. So I really love these ideas, and I think right in there's like a zillion ways that we can think of using technology to help us out there, and it really is to build and grow that awareness of truly how we're operating, because there are many ways in which we operate which are invisible to us. And you need that feedback in order to be able to affect any change. I mean, yeah, you could change it, but like not with any direction in mind. Like you can't go where you want to go with that. It'll happen randomly at the whim of something else. So yeah, I really love that point. Mm-hmm. There was another one too that I really liked. It'll come to me in a second.
Yeah, man, I loved all that, because the power of feedback is amazing. If you're looking at and there's have you ever talked to somebody and you see somebody and they're in a pattern and you can see it and they just cannot see it, And so by bringing up this information, we now are armed with what we need to make new choices. So whether it's not a proper diet, Or, law of attraction, you get to more of what you focus on. So if you look at how much time you're spending on social media, I think that app actually exists right now. Are you 1 hour a day on Facebook, 7 hours a week? Are you, what are you on there? And then you can look and be like, oh, get off Facebook, because you'll be in it and you won't be aware. So
Stop
all of
scrolling.
them, like, combine them all, because scrolling, yeah, totally. Yeah, and
I think,
and then there's,
go ahead, man.
no, sorry, go ahead. You're the guest. Lay it on me. I think there's a bit of lag.
Yeah, I sort of I really like this idea line where we're talking about, how are you using your time and what are we doing and what are we spending our time on? And I think, especially that we're so familiar with computers. In some ways, I think we can actually end up thinking in many ways we're like computers. And you hear people maybe even say things like, oh, my hard disk is full, or like, my CPUs are like, overclocking or whatever. I mean, I hang out with a lot of computer nerds, but maybe that shows. But the thing is, we're used to using a technology where the content that is flowing, the information that's flowing through the technology, does not in any way affect the functionality of it. And so if you use a computer as a model for your own brain, right? Like, a computer doesn't care like how much you're using Facebook or how much you're watching YouTube or like how you're using your email. But as human beings, we learn, and we learn in every single moment. So we're sort of like learning machines where, like, if you're driving a car and the gas is learned, like, it's sort of stuck. We're stuck in this thing which is driving around learning whatever it is that we're experiencing. And so, I think that the idea that we can, use ourselves without in some way affecting ourselves through the process is something that we really have to shake. So, for instance, when you're on Facebook and if you're spending too much time on Facebook, what are you practicing in that process? What are you learning? And that can be really hard to see, but it's a really important question, because what we do in every moment does change us. And in that way, we're totally unlike the contemporary model of computers, or at least the computers that we engage with. I think there's actually an interesting thing to talk about as we talk about the latest in neural networks and how we're creating machines that learn and that sort of thing. And that way, maybe we're getting closer to the way we can think about ourselves as computers. But currently, like the computer that's sitting on your desk, it doesn't care what's coming through your email, right? But how we use that information flow and the information that we allow to flow through us has huge implications on the way we are adapting in every moment. And we can't turn the adaptation off. And we have to remember that. So, I'm here doing something, I'm practicing it, and I'm learning it, and I'm giving up something for it, and I'm gaining something for it. But the gain could be totally in the wrong direction if you're not careful.
No, shoot, you cut out you cut out after you said you're gaining something for it. I love that. That was such a good point, but I couldn't get the end of it.
The next thing was, you have to consider that the gain could be in the wrong direction, right? Or it's something that takes you away from what your deeper intentions are.
Yeah, glad I got you to re-say that. Yeah, and that's interesting, because when you're saying these concepts, I'm thinking about the power of free will. We have the choice to go down Facebook, and we have the choice Twitter to eat a hamburger or a salad or whatever the heck. But when we have the feedback, then we can, we're really seeing what these choices over time do to us. And that's where our free will comes in, because then you can say, Andrew, who's a mutual friend of ours, who was on the show yesterday, former pro golfer, he was just saying that, does this choice bring me towards my goal of being a pro golfer and accomplishing what I want? Or then now his new thought, going beyond golf, does this choice nourish me and allow me to grow? And so that's a level of consciousness and awareness in itself, where people aren't really asking themselves that question. And it's such a deep, fun question we should be asking ourselves. And as technology continues to play a role, we can use it as a better feedback system, so that we have all of the information and use that in a way that can actually serve us. And so, what I wanted to move on to a little bit, I think we talked about it already, but you were just speaking. I think you did twice. What was the yoga? What's the yoga fest called, Whistler? What was the name of your talk? It's such an awesome title.
You're talking about Wanderlust, and the
Yeah,
talk was called "The Neuroscience of Enlightenment."
yeah. That's what kind of, that's wild. That's such a good title. I would be front row center for anybody giving me that kind of title. And so, where do you see, with that talk? We have about 10 minutes left or so. I know you're going to have to get running. But you talk about personal development and how technology can fit in. I know that we touched on that, but can you maybe give us a synopsis of what that talk was about?
Wow, yeah, I'll see if I can do that. It was like an hour and a half. So there was lots of fun stuff. I did a lot of dancing in the class. So, um, so I'd actually love to talk about dancing as well. But what we were basically, a lot of the talk was really looking at what's happening in the scientific community, because the word mindfulness has become extremely popular, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. Not the least of which is there's been a huge interest that has been cultivated in the scientific community, and we're actually seeing the science on meditation really explode. It follows a classic exponential curve. If you actually take a look at the number of research sightings that occur, or sort of new research papers that come out every year. And so it's totally wild what's happening out there. It's gone from almost nothing to like it's bananas out there. If you want to do a neuroscience, research, your game's on if you're doing something on mindfulness. And so people are really interested in hearing about what's happening in the science, and looking for in many ways scientific proof and information about what's happening to us when we meditate. So we talked a lot about what some of the studies have shown, but also we talked about where the science is falling short. And I think it's important to recognize that the science is playing catch up in so many different ways in this field. And we're used to looking towards science to sort of be that guiding light for us, but the science is really playing catch up. And there's a lot of really interesting things we've seen, and definitely what it's shown us is that there are very real changes happening in the brain because of meditation practice, and definitely it's improving people's lives. But it actually hasn't gone very far in actually explaining what's happening, why is the shift positive, what is the mechanism that allows these practices to work. I think one way of looking at this is, in order to do science on something, you have to control your variables. And if you look at meditation and sort of transformative practices as a whole, they really encompass the whole of the human experience, because we're talking about human beings here. And from a scientific point of view, that's extremely hard to control for, because each of us is so different. And we have to consider so many aspects and facets of ourselves and of life in order to be able to affect some positive change in a direction where we want to head. In a scientific study, you're concerned with trying to distill things down to like an essence that you can actually control and test and vary, so you can know what's happening. And I think there are some fundamental problems with actually how you study it. So I think, there's really, really amazing work happening. And I think, if anyone who's following in your channel here, I think it'd be great for them to check out on YouTube, the Mind and Life Institute. There's actually a really amazing conference every year where there's, a bunch of, amazing scientists who meet with contemplatives and actually discover together, where the combination of science and meditation, mindfulness, really, where that could take us. And there's deep questions there. Perception, consciousness, well-being. They talk about physics. Basically every a whole host of different scientific fields in many ways are coming together to start to focus on the problem of well-being and the health which is in our sort of mind and spirit. And I'm totally excited with what's happening. And so, being able to sort of share some of that with people was really exciting. But also, I mean, being able to through practices, share, some things that help to make real some of the things that we're talking about. So, one of the things that's has come out through the neuroscientific study is, what people call the default mode network activity, which in many ways is related to our narrative self-experience. And so by narrative meaning, it's like yourself as a story. It's when we're, inside having that conversation or that mental dialogue about what's happening right now and, where are we going, what do we want to do, what's happened, and this is when we're, thinking about the past or projecting to the future, or, we're just exercising our imagination through fantasy. So all of this stuff, we're actually kind of using our sensorium as a virtual reality simulator. And then there's another mode which we really engage when we meditate, and that is, really tapping into the senses and what they're receiving from our environment right now. And so it could be what we hear, what we feel, what we see and smell. But it's different. It's tapping into that present moment flow of information from the senses, as opposed to like our virtual reality simulation. And we see the brain react in different ways depending on which mode you're in. And so, when we say that you're stuck in your head, or you're lost in thought, we're talking about being in that narrative mode and in that virtual reality simulation. And then when we meditate or we're practicing mindfulness, we're actually tapping into the present moment sensation, and we're receiving real information from the world right now. And so I think, many of us are very well practiced at being lost in thought. And we become very good at that mode. And in some ways, we neglect perhaps the sort of present moment awareness mode of functioning. And I think it's a really important concept because when we're practicing mindfulness, we're going into that mode. But it's really easy to think about, why that's so important. So if you think about how we, plan for the future, and this is how we actually achieve our goals, we actually have to engage in that mental simulation. We have to use that virtual reality simulator. This is the I want to do this. And so if this happens, I should do this. And if that happens, I should do that. Right? So you go and rehearse what could happen. We actually also reflect in the same way. We look at what's happened and we learn from it. So we replay scenarios and we actually extract information that, in the moment, we didn't recognize, and we use that to empower us for the future. So it's a really important thing to do. The more and more we live in a virtual reality simulator, the less and less we're tapped into the real world. And so if you think of what happens here, as you continue to stay in the simulation, the validity of the simulation becomes less and less. Right? So that simulation of the future can only stay valid if you actually stay rooted in what's happening around you right now. So we do need to achieve a balance where we actually are tapping into what's happening in the present moment. Otherwise, there's no way that we can use this amazing ability to simulate and imagine to actually, build upon that present state in the world to actually go where we want to go.
That's amazing, man. That's such a great. I don't know if that's what you dropped at your talk, but that was such an amazing piece of information. It's so spot on, and it's from a perspective that's different from mine. We grow up and we all experience the world in a different way. And yours, your understandings, through technology and these different things, and you're creating a really balanced approach from science and mindfulness. And for me, I'm kind of coming to the other side where I was always kind of rejecting science because, well, not rejecting it, but it pissed me off because people would say, how do you know? I'm like, well, I don't know how I think some of this stuff is unknowable. I don't know why, I'm doing this, or energy work is, woo woo. And I was like, it's not to me, just because, science tells me that we don't have the science to say that it's real to me. So I had this chip on my shoulder, and now we have this full circle of people like you and even scientists opening up and saying, look, this is the limitation of science. Let's look at that. And okay, hippie, if you want to do that, let's measure this. And then I can give you good information to see what's working and what's not. Because maybe if I'm imagining the color red, it does something to my brainwaves. And, if I do orange, it does something to my brainwaves. And Dr. Joe Dispenza, who I talk about seems frequently because, he's got the leading, some of the best science on meditation, Kundalini experiences, how people are literally having spontaneous healings through meditation. And so again, if you have somebody who's cured themselves of a terminal illness or something that they've had for years and it's incurable, and then they do, it's a miracle. So science is like, well, prove it to me. So he's having repeated, results from people going into a state of meditation, meditating on health, and then all of a sudden, sometimes it's a couple months, sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes it's 2 years, but they have this spontaneous healing from something that, well, spontaneous over 2 years of practice is not really spontaneous, but it's a miracle to the scientific community and to the doctors nonetheless. So the more we can have a balanced approach in all things, keeping an open mind to meditation, to bring in awareness, to use technology as a tool. And you're definitely one of the leaders on taking technology and what it can do to make us more human, to understand ourselves more, to be more of who we are, to come back. And I love what you kept talking about, the present moment. And that's all there ever is, back to presence, back to the experience. And so in your experience, what an interesting way to put it, you've got the virtual reality as the narration in your mind, and a lot of people are in the fear mode, right? Oh my God, what if this happens? What that? And they keep running these scenarios. Their body's reacting in a way as they think of those things. Your body has to react in a way. So then they're creating a result in their life. And if they were aware that their thoughts and their repetitive narration, so to speak, they would be able to kind of curb that and start to make changes in how they communicate with themselves and how they communicate with others.
Yeah, totally. It's the idea or the imagery of how when we repeat a thought over and over again, we're sort of burning in a trail, right? We're burning a path into our mind. And the more we travel it, the harder it is for us to break from it. So we are habitual in our thoughts, and it's important for us to recognize that. And our thoughts, they can be triggered by a scenario, and that's part of how we cope with things. But the more and more you jump back on that trail again, the harder and harder it is to step away. And so, so to repeatedly go over things, over and over again, has this effect where it becomes harder and harder to break from, because it's growing deeper and deeper. The other thing which can happen in those thought cycles is, you'll find that the emotion typically drives in a negative direction. And, things can actually become more and more negative over time. And even the way we remember things can become more and more negative. We know that when we remember something, we actually corrupt that memory with how we currently feel. And so, you can one way of looking at the cycle is, if you're remembering something bad or made you feel a certain way, so that feeling comes into your body, right? And then you go through it again. You're replaying the memory, and you're re-encoding the memory along with that present moment feeling. So you can see how you can drive off in one direction by doing that. Another thing can happen, like you might use a happy thought to bring yourself back up again because you feel, bad or uncomfortable in some way. And what you're doing there in that case is you can be disempowering those positive memories, for example, because they become contaminated with how you're currently feeling, right? So to continue to try to pull yourself, in another direction, can actually tend to corrupt the tools that you're actually using to do that. So yeah, we have to be careful about how we do that as well.
Yeah, man. Yep. I agree with all that. Yes, spot on again. We are about out of time because I know you've probably got a lot of things to go over at Muse. I just quickly ask you, I'm definitely curious to ask you this one. What are your top 3 books, 3 or 4 or whatever, but what are the ones that had the biggest impact on you?
That's a good one. About a year ago, I picked up a book called Wake Up to Your Life by Ken MacLeod. and it's basically like a comprehensive tome of meditation practices. And I'd highly recommend for anyone who's really interested in the mechanics. So this is not just how you do the practice, but why the practice may work and how it interrelates with everything else. It's a unbelievably good book. And I remember picking it up for the first time and just saying, "What is this book?" And I picked it up in the middle and I started reading, and I was just like, "Oh my God," and I flipped backwards, and before I knew it, I was at the beginning going, "Damn," So yeah, so it's one of those, I definitely recommend that one. Let's see, what else have I really liked? Moved on. So that book does some really, really cool stuff with the elements, because there are some practices that use the elements as a vehicle to help you recognize patterns. And so there was another book that I read after that one called Spectrum of Ecstasy, which was written by, his name is Nagakpa Chogyam, I believe, but it's called Spectrum of Ecstasy. And also it goes really deep on these things, but it's these two books together were probably the most inspirational with respect to being able to witness reactive patterns functioning in your life. And so the really cool thing about a reactive pattern is when you're reacting, you're not aware of it. You kind of lose your awareness. And so it's very hard to recognize them in operation. And so, and this comes from actually quite ancient practices, Tibetan Buddhist practice primarily, but it basically gives you templates to see a reaction when it's happening, because you recognize the cues that the reaction comes along with. Or, these could be states of body, for example. And so you have a template then to recognize the reaction, and then you can sort of start to look backwards and say what happened. So that, that's been super cool.
Yeah, that's powerful information. I've actually been noticing that in myself more. I do these practices, and I had to be honest with myself. I get mad a lot. Not like rage out mad, but well, yeah, sometimes, but like just frustrated. You know what I mean? Like I'll be doing something, and everything gets piled on, and I was like, and I just get real pissed all of a sudden. I was like, whoa, I was like, you're getting like real pissed, like sometimes. So, I just like, oh, I don't need to have these deep states of frustration. And as they come in, I can handle them differently. I don't always have to get pissed. So, that's such an interesting concept, because as I've been conscious of this over the last week, that's been happening way less. I see it coming now. So the templates sound really interesting. I'm probably going to have a look at that.
Super cool. Yeah. Third book, I don't know. For me, any book that Hermann Hesse wrote, I found most of its works to be pretty moving. So yeah, there you go.
Awesome, brother. Appreciate that. Well, my friend, thank you so much for coming on. You were awesome. I had such a great conversation with you. It did get a little choppy with the internet, but man, just listening to just how your view of the world and what you're doing it's so fascinating. And I think I could pick. There's so many more questions I had. We could go down so many different avenues. But where can people find information about you if they want to get a hold of you? I don't know if you're doing speaking. I know you're grinding over at Muse. So, where can people get a hold of you and see your work and some of the stuff that you're up to, and maybe some future projects? Because I know Muse is cooking up some exciting stuff over there.
The easiest way is just through Choose Muse. It's choosemuse.com, CHOOSEMUSE.com. And you can find me through there, and, email works, and you can find my phone number. There's lots of ways.
What was the last one?
I said there are lots of ways.
Oh, there are lots of ways. Yeah.
Yeah, you can find me on the internet if you really want to.
Come and hunt Chris down, and if there's an ecstatic dance around, or there's some sort of movement studio, you might find him in there with some righteous pants.
Yeah, meet me on the dance floor. That is the best way to make a connection.
Totally, man. Okay, brother. Well, thanks so much for coming on. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We appreciate it. We love you. Until next time. Peace.